International 4900. This is an old one, 2000. So this truck was built. It's quite a rig. It's been a good truck. Huey engine, 466 in it. It started out life as a sand truck, so it's got some corrosion and stuff. It threw salt and sand in the wintertime, plowed snow in the wintertime, so you had all the snow coming up with like the salted snow, of course, over the winter, getting sprayed on everything. So right now it's got an antifreeze leak. Watch West Work did a really good video of this same job that I'm doing. I got to take that front timing cover completely out, and also the radiator's leaking antifreeze as well, so I got to replace the radiator. I've got a brand new one sitting right here. It's going to be a good job. So far I haven't run into too many, a little bit of rusty bolts and stuff like that, but it hasn't been too bad, mostly just hoses stuck. So what you're going to find is you got to separate this frame that holds your condenser core on. When that comes out, that'll give you access to some more bolts that holds your intercooler on down in here. Check this, I didn't realize my camera was here, or else I would have taken a quick video of what it looks like before, but it's pretty much the same, except for I took the supports off the top and the cables for the hood to hold the hood up when it's open. The hood's just resting on the front spray bar. This truck was converted to a water truck a few years back. It's quite a low hour, low mile unit because of its life here, plowing snow in a municipality. So there's just a couple of that hose I might have to replace, cut off, because it's just melted in place or formed in place. So far it hasn't been too terribly bad, but this whole structure has to come off. Let's go over to the other side, have a look. Just thought I'd make a video because this is a pretty big job. I'm going to take your overflow tank off, and I think I'm gonna have to take this right off. I was just gonna leave it, but it's gonna be in the way. I was gonna let it just hang there by the hoses. So on this side it's pretty much the same thing. There's your main mount bolts down there, but you're gonna have to unbolt this part here and move the air-to-air a little bit forward to be able to get at the rest of your bolts to get the radiator out. Pulling the radiator, it's interesting that this truck, there was another truck that was like the sister truck to it that I replaced the radiator in years ago. That one has been traded off or went to auction, or I think it was a trade. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It didn't have the same air-to-air pipes that came up. I think there's a horsepower rating change right in those years, 2000 and 2001, and they changed the design of the intercooler. And this one has the one that curls over top of the radiator like that, so it's a little bit harder to change the radiator. It's not that much worse. Everything, I'm going to pull that all out as one piece, I believe. Basically, I have to pull the air-to-air out, so you have to make sure it's unbolted from this frame that holds your condenser core on, and then it should be free and you can pull it all out. The other truck was easier to change the radiator on. It's a quicker job because I could leave the air-to-air in it. I believe it's been a long time since I did that. Wear some gloves because there's no shortage of sharp stuff that you got to work around when you're taking these bolts out. Those little screws in there and stuff. I had left the grill and everything in. If I don't have to take that out, I'm not gonna. And that should give me enough room to go ahead and start working on that front timing cover. I ended up buying the special tools just because, as you know, there's a big shortage of everything lately, and it takes a long time to get stuff, so I had to actually order the OTC tools, the 20mm socket and the gear puller to get that. I think it's the idler bolt, and I can't remember if it's the accessory drive gear or the cam idler gear. It's a cam idler gear. It has to be pulled off in order to get that front cover off. So this truck, it appeared to be a head gasket leak. So that's one thing, if you have one of these engines that you're working on and you can't tell if it's the head gasket leak or not, and it's coming from the front in here. It's hard to see with all the hoses, but underneath, part of it was that thermostat housing. It's got a lot of antifreeze leaks. The radiator leaks, the radiator hoses needed to be replaced, and that one's starting to leak again. It also needs a new fan belt. There's a chunk of the belt. It's crusty. I've got a new one to replace it with. So it could be your thermostat housing, but right behind the thermostat housing, if it's leaking from that front timing cover, it can look just like a head gasket leak, because it'll kind of wick down, like down there, and right down in there is where the head meets the block. And that's where it could manifest down there like this. It'll kind of go along that little ledge there where the block is, and it'll look just like the head gasket's leaking, but it's actually the front timing cover that's leaking. So keep that in mind if you're diagnosing a leak on one of these trucks. You got to clean it and blow with air, because the leak will come from right up in underneath the thermostat cover and your air conditioning bracket. All that stuff's over top of where the leak will start, where it'll originate. And it's going to be really tough to actually figure out if it's the head gasket or the front timing cover. And you can change the head gasket without pulling this front timing cover apart. And you might do that and it won't fix the leak, which is not good. So it's leaking from way back inside there. That's where it is. So that's what I found with this one. That's a caution that you're going to want to keep an eye out for if you're working on one of these trucks. I've worked on a fair bit of these trucks, even on my own, and also at my day job. It just seems like this is quite a common engine and configuration. A lot of different shipping companies and stuff will use these single axle smaller trucks, which is fine. And I think these engines are pretty good. The Huey, of course, isn't as good as the old mechanical, as reliable, I don't think, as the old mechanical ones. But that being said, this one hasn't given us a ton of trouble. I think that this one may have had the ECM replaced. It just quit running and it turned out it was the ECM. But other than that, it's worked quite well. The engine has been pretty good. So other than coolant leaks and stuff like that, which I'm going to fix pretty soon here. So I got this thing ready to pull now. A couple things that you want to keep in mind: the fan and the shroud are going to have to come with the radiator, because the bottom hose, the spout that the hose goes onto, sticks out way past the shroud here. You can't bend this. You can't get that shroud back far enough to get it out of the way, because this blower coolant spout there comes out and curls up underneath the shroud. So it's pretty much impossible to get that shroud past it. So you're going to take the fan off. I've got the fan off. I didn't realize that this has actually got an air fan on it, an air clutch operated fan. It's been disconnected who knows when, long before my time here. So I'll have to connect that back up, I think. I'm not sure. I'll have to see if it leaks or something first. That's probably why it's been disconnected. It must have leaked, or maybe it just, the hose got ripped off and somebody was too lazy to put a new one back on there, because you've got to get back in there to get it. Anyways, it doesn't matter right now. I am lifting it out. I've just got the way I've got it rigged isn't the best, but it's because I'm not reusing it or something to care. But you can tilt the intercooler. I didn't have to take the intercooler out with it. You can just tilt it ahead like this, but it will hang up. You just got to keep an eye on that. And those intercooler tubes will likely hit the cores too a little bit on the way out if you're not holding them back. It might drag a little bit on there. So if you're reusing the radiator, keep an eye on that. I'm not, so I'm not overly concerned about that, because this radiator's junk anyway. There she goes. Hose is out of the way. Oh, sure. Barf some coolant. Anyway, I guess it's going to be difficult for me to hold on to the camera and try and hold everything out of the way. Oh, something's catching eye. I see what it is. Anyway, I'm sure everybody gets the point that you got to take off to get one of these radiators out. For all that it matters, you got to unhook the intercooler anyway. There's cooler lines down there as well. Transmission cooler lines. You got to unhook. If you're dealing with an automatic, you'll have to unhook those cooler lines. Lose a little bit of tranny oil. I think the intercooler could come with it for all that it matters. I was thinking the whole frame would come out, but yeah, it's bolted down below. It's tied in here, and there's quite a bit hooked to that frame before it would come out. And I couldn't get the bolt off in the bottom. But you can see all the salt and dirt and stuff on there that rotted out the radiator, just sitting there. Anyway, I gotta just stop filming here and get this out, because I'm gonna have to pry it a little bit, just move it around a little bit so it gets past some of these things that it's hooking up. All right. There she goes. And the rad's on. This thing's caked pretty bad. With the intercooler and stuff in front of it, and the condenser core, it doesn't. It's pretty tough to get in there and wash it. Wash it from the fan side a little bit, but tight to get a pressure washer in there. But you can see how much dirt is stuck in there. Once it quits swinging, I'll get a better close up. And you can see it caked right full. So this truck didn't have any overheating issues because of that. It was cooling really good. It's also got extra cooling tubes on it to winterize the water pipes and stuff. The hose reel's still hooked up, and there's coolant too. Just heater hose wrapped around that circulates coolant. So it gets a little auxiliary cooling there too. I'm surprised how much heavier that fan hub is with the air clutch in it. So I have to look at that, play around with that a little bit before I put it back together. AC belt. So I've got some room to work now. I don't know if I don't think I have to take this frame out to be able to get that front cover off. I think I can work in between here. So the air to air, I didn't end up taking it out, I just left it in there. It's a pretty heavy piece. So you could take it out with the fan, or with the radiator, I'm sure, if you so decided to. But I think I'm going to have enough clearance to get back in there, especially if I get the lower rad hose off the radiator. There's a bolt right down in there that I couldn't get out that holds all this frame together, the frame in there. But like I say, that's a lot more work to get this frame out of here than I think just getting the radiator out. So I'm just going to leave it in there. Get some hoses out of the way and get that AC pump off of there, and then the balancer off and get tearing into this thing so I can get that the rear of the timing cover reseal. Timing cover to block is where the antifreeze is coming from. So like I say, it's going to be a nice little project here to do, and I'll keep it all documented and posted for you guys as we go. I just took the fan belt off here, digging in a little deeper. So I always like to check pulleys, see what their idlers and stuff like that. These are, you got the water pump and there's only the one tensioner on this truck that has a bearing in it. But when I see fan belts, you saw what the belt looked like. See, there's a tensioner for the AC as well. It's not in too bad a shape. When you see the belts getting shredded though and pieces coming off of them, this belt was pretty old and crusty anyways, but when you see the ribs starting to come off, there's a piece of it there. Makes you wonder about alignment, and a lot of times I find that's idler or tensioner pulleys, so check out this bearing in this tensioner pulley. Sounds really good, eh? So pretty obvious that bearing shot. I'm going to have to get one of those ordered up, and I really hope it's not too far away. Like, if it comes right down to it, I don't want to reuse it because the tensioner is probably just about as bad as the bearing in there, but I guess if it comes right down to it, I can put another bearing in there. Just into the pulley to the idler wheel itself, and then reuse that. Anyways, that's just something one of the things that you run into on projects like that, unfortunately. So I'll probably, if I can get both tensioners, the AC belt tensioner as well, place them both at the same time while I'm in here. It's a lot easier to do it right now than when I get it all back together again in a couple of weeks, and that's always the way it goes. As soon as you get it back together, if you use those used parts, even if they seem to be in good condition, they'll always go like a week later and you'll end up tearing it all apart again. Alright, back at her again this morning on this project. I just pulled the intercooler out because it was all unbolted anyways. I had to unbolt it from the mounts and the radiator to get the radiator out. And I just wanted the extra little bit of room. I didn't want to damage it at all when I'm working in here. the air conditioning, the condenser core is not in great shape, but it doesn't have any holes in it. It's just the like the wafers that are rusting out on that. So I'm just going to leave that for the moment. That's not that hard to get at if it needs to be changed in the future. Just got my puller on the harmonic balancer, and boy, that thing was tight. I've got the tensioner pulleys off and ordering new ones today. Belts off and everything, of course. So it's coming along pretty good. It's actually not that bad. There's quite a bit of room in there. The frame, the radiator support frame here, would be nice if that was not in the way, but I'm not going to bother taking it out because I don't need to. And there's a lot of alignment and stuff that's got to, it's going to have to be marked. Somebody's had this apart. You can see where they've marked that, and they've had some markings on the intercooler too. So got the balancer coming out. And I'll tell you, before that thing cracked, I was wondering if I was going to strip that puller. It was so tight. I was just about to go get the torch and just get it warm, but I didn't end up needing to. It cracked just before I decided to heat it up. So that's good. I'm glad that's coming off. So pretty soon I'm going to be taking off that timing cover. I got a few more pieces to take off. Just took some of the piping off to get it out of the way. The alternator and the alternator bracket needs to come off, and surprisingly, this being an old sand truck, all that stuff came off. None of the bolts were seized up or anything, so that was good. I got the crank bolts out. They all came out. None of that was rusted in. You can see it's all in pretty good shape. That plate, I know that can be really rusty. They got a pretty good program here, I have to say, where the operators wash the trucks off at the end of each day, so the salt doesn't get in there and eat away at everything. It gets washed out. So the alternator and the bracket need to come off. This is the bracket here. You've got screws, bolts that go through the timing cover, and then they have nuts on the other side. And those are the ones that have seized up on other trucks, but this one's pretty good. You can see there's not a whole bunch of rust on there, so that came apart really good. Fan pulley hub. And here's the two tensioners here that I'm going to replace because the bearings are definitely gone in one of them for sure, but I might as well do them both while I'm in there. Now's the time. While it's apart. Got a new thermostat coming. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to show everybody, is that the coolant passages go in through the top of the timing cover on the other side, on the driver's side. But when it starts to leak, it comes down. You can see in there. So there's kind of a deck where the cylinder head bolts to the block. Coolant will come out through there, and then it'll wick along right there and look just like the head gasket's leaking. You can see that this one's been leaking for some time. Some of this fresh stuff is just because I took the top rad hose off and spilled some coolant down the side of the block, so it's still wet from that, but it's also been leaking a long time. Look at in there. You can see where the coolant's been leaking and leaving behind some crusty residue there. So down in there you can see how much coolant's leaking. So there's a pool underneath this thing every morning, and it just progressively got worse. You can see there some of the coolant that was coming down the front of the cover and getting in behind the tensioner pulley and stuff. So eventually I had to get all the parts. Right now it takes a long time to get the parts and the special tools to do this job, so we just kept adding coolant here and there. It wasn't a huge leak, but like I say, every morning there was a little puddle underneath it, so it gets to that time where you need to replace it. Part of it was too, the radiator was leaking out the bottom tank, and it was just from sitting down in there, and the dirt and salt and stuff gets in there, and you can't wash it out. And eventually it'll just rot it out. There was two of these trucks that were sand trucks, and the other one I just replaced the radiator before it was traded in. And this one made it another probably 4 years or so. But eventually its day came as well, so now is the time to get the radiator in, and while I'm resealing this front cover. So I'm gonna pull that pulley off, take the water pump out, take the fan hub out. I'm not sure if I even need to. Well, no, there's bolts I think behind that fan hub, so I've got to get that fan hub out. So I'm gonna pull all that off, and then it's time to unbolt the cover. But I have to unbolt the high pressure oil pump as well. It's on the other side. And that one's a little tougher to get at right behind the ECM. The ECM itself is easy to unbolt, but the bracket is... actually, maybe you can get the bracket off fairly easy. I've taken it off before, and kind of a pain. So I'm going to try and get those bolts out without taking the ECM out. I think I've got to unbolt that, and maybe, hopefully not the compressor there, I can't remember. But that's where I'm going next. So I'm going to start getting some bolts out now, and then I'll show you what I find. Removing the high pressure oil pump now. There's one bolt that's easy to get at. Get some light in there so you can see it. 10mm head on it, that's right there. Right there. There's another one underneath. So there's lots of talk online about how to remove it. Get some light in there, hopefully you can see it. It's tough to get at because you can't see it. This is pretty much, I think it's about 90 degrees from that top one up there. So if you just look through the pump body, you can't see it from down there. Fortunately, it's kind of on the other side of everything. So I just wanted to show everybody that how I got it out of there. I think it looks good. I can just get some light. I take about a 6-inch extension with a 10mm deep socket on it, and just put it in behind everything there. Feel around, and eventually it's kind of right behind your, there now. Right behind that hose there. So you can't even see the extension. You can see the end of the extension there. 3/8 drive. And the bolt is kind of right behind that high pressure oil in there. Too bad I can't. Yeah, see, you can see my socket back in behind there shining. That's where it is. Let's see. Didn't come up there. Try to get a magnet in there and pull it out. Need a better magnet. This one may not be strong enough. But anyway, it's back there. Yeah, I'm going to need a different magnet to get it out. That's where that bolt is, and like I say, you can't see it. You got to go kind of by feel, but it's not that way. There she goes. And that's the one right there. Goes through. You can see it's about the same length as the other one there. It's going to hold that into the timing cover. So that's the other bolt. It's going to be a little tricky getting it back in, but now I can take the top one out. That's easier. Same thing, just run an extension back from behind in here. Take that other one out, and then you got the high pressure oil pump out of the timing cover, and you can carry on with the removal process. Okay, so I got the front cover off now. I'll show you the gear train, and right up in there is where our leak is. It's the one that we're going to reseal. So it's coming out of this coolant passage right here. It goes down to the water pump. The water pump's mounted. So you can see the crusty coolant stuff back in there. I blew it out a little bit, so it's not bad, but that's where it comes from. I just want to show everybody. That's where she's leaking. So this, I had to pry on this cover a little bit to get it off, very, very gingerly. So you want the last thing you want to do is crack this cover, but where it was holding is down here. I took the 4 bolts out from the oil pan into the cover, and because I'm going to have to do that anyways. There's one of them there. Because to get this back part of the cover off, you have to take those 4 bolts out of the oil pan. So then after I did that, I had to get a screwdriver and just tap this way from underneath, tap forward, to get it to come off there, because it was just like I missed a bolt. It was stuck so good. It was coming off on the top here. I could push it open, and it loosened. Just really, really gently pry on it, and it'll come off. I've seen some videos where they just fall off, but this one didn't. So that's where it was sticking, is on that oil pan gasket at the bottom. Alright, so now I've got my special puller, and I do have the 20mm 12-point socket to take this off. I ordered those before I started the job, and I've got my new seals and stuff like that, so I'm going to start on that next. This is fairly long project. Here's the top of the timing chain cover here, and you can see where the antifreeze coolant was staining it there. So that's where the coolant leak was. Okay, a couple things to take notice of here that I didn't see covered in other videos is I've got my cam gear off. That was fairly straightforward. I'll just mention how that works first. Here it is. So this is the puller. That's the puller that International says to use. Got that. This gear has a plate over top of it like this, so it's going to look like that when you go to take it out. Those two dowels are timed, so you can see where the hole is there. You got to just take these 3 screws out, hex screws, and take that cover off. Now let's go and look at the other gears, see what we have to do to take them off. There was timing marks on this. Somebody had timed it, but the marks didn't line up on the gears like you can see down there. I had to turn the crank a little bit to get the puller in because the puller was hitting that bolt right there, so I had to turn everything a little bit. I'm not real worried about that because they got keyways on the gears. So this one, this is a tight nut here. This comes off first. But still, this piece, I got the 20mm 12-point socket for this, but you can see that it's got to be a thin wall socket. So that's the special tool that International, OTC I think makes it for International. And this comes off, and this one comes out, and it's tight. That's the torque on that. Over here. And your gear should come off. There we go. There we go. So that's one out. You can see I've got it marked. The marks, when I timed this at top dead center before I took it apart, and I'm not sure exactly why the marks that weren't lining up that were already on there from assembly. It may be because they're a hunting gear set, I don't know. But I will line them all back up when I put it back together. I'm not real concerned about that. So now I've got to take this one out. Anyway, so that this bolt here, this is a 12-point 20mm socket. I did get one, and this is a snap-on 3/4 drive 12-point 20mm socket. This is an impact socket because he didn't order the proper International OTC part. It doesn't work because the walls of the socket are too thick to get in there. So I used a chrome socket, and it's not the proper one. So I would recommend making sure you get the proper tool. I thought that was the proper tool, but when I got in here to do it, it didn't work. So that's just something to keep in mind. So now I'm going to pull the other gear off and just continue on with getting these bolts out of that are holding the cover onto the block, and then do a little update. Okay, got it off. You can see obviously where the leak was. Look at this gasket, how crusty that is. There's rust and stuff all over it, and it's stained really bad from coolant, and it just flopped off like that when the rest of it's all stuck down when I took the timing cover off. So that's where the leak came from. Lighting's not so good in the shade here, but you can see where the coolant was leaking right up there, and then it would come down the side of the block here, drip off the bottom of the engine. It looked like a head gasket leak, but it was actually the rear timing cover leak. So a couple things to keep in mind I'll tell you about is this piece here and other videos was a problem, and it had to be cut out. This truck wasn't too bad, I found, with corrosion and stuff like that, even being an old sand truck. However, that being said, this was rusted in there, and you can see where I pried on it very gently against the 2 housings, because the timing cover goes over top of that, seals with an O-ring, and I had to actually rattle it a little bit with a air hammer there to get it loose. But I just heated it up and sprayed penetrating oil on it and then worked it. Just tapped on the timing cover where I could. You can't swing a hammer very much in here, but you don't want to anyways, because you don't want to hit that timing cover too hard and break it. So just be real careful with that and work on it, and hopefully if this happens, it'll come out. But if you're doing this job, it'd be a good idea just to order that in the 2 O-rings that seal it, and then you could just cut it out, remove it with a slide hammer or whatever when you get the thing off, and then just save yourself some time for what that part's worth. So I'm just about ready. I'm going to start cleaning stuff here this morning, and I'm just about ready to put this thing back together now, or start putting it back together. I hope I have all my seals. I had to order a couple more seals, and I'm gonna have to, oh, that's the other thing, I can't get that little fitting there for about another week, so I should have ordered it. Anyways, live and learn. So I'm going to have to clean it up and reuse it. Here's where it goes into the back of the timing cover. I can get the seals for it, so I'm going to put an anaerobic sealer on there and new seals. There's the timing cover. You can see where the coolant passages are here that go down into the water pump. And it's pretty obvious that that was leaking. You look at there's a little bit of pitting in there and stuff, so I'll clean that up real good. Actually, it doesn't look like it's pitted. It looks like it's just residue from the coolant leaking out of it. You can see where it's all stained there from the antifreeze leaking, so that's obviously where the leak is from. Flip this over. Here's the inside. Come on. So there's your coolant passages that go up. That's where the leak. Okay, and I've got a front gasket kit here. I just hope that this has all my seals, because this truck is used on a weekly basis, and anyways, and they can't be out of service for that long, but if you can't get parts, I guess that we'll just have to make something else work. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to start cleaning this up and hopefully get the cover back on here. I might not have the O-rings for that piece though. So I'll clean it up, might take it out of there, clean it up real good. And if I don't have the O-rings in this kit, then I'll have to just wait until they show up. I ordered a couple of those. Anyway, I've got the front of the engine supported because I had to take that front mount off. In other videos it shows how to do that. There's the bolts for it. So it's a fair bit of disassembly, but it's actually not that bad once you start. Oh, the other thing is, as mentioned in other videos, that these bolts are really soft that go into the rear part of the cover, the rear timing cover, holding onto the block. So I had to knock one out with a chisel and heat it up, and I pretty much rounded the head off doing that. They're like, reminds me of something that comes out of an old Volkswagen. They're just super soft. You gotta be really careful with it. So that might be something that if you're doing this job you might want to think about, is just getting a couple of these. I think they're all pretty much they're the same size for sure in thread and stuff, but I think they're all the same length. I don't know where I put that one that I had to heat up, but anyway, I think you get the point. That it's just a good idea. I had to hit a couple of them with a hammer and chisel just to get them to turn, just to crack them loose, because if not I'd round them right off with the socket, and you don't want to do that. They're like these ones. Got a few in here. So anyway, those are the bolts that are called. Oh yeah, I left them down in here. So here's one here. Ugh. That was probably the worst one there. See, I had to chisel it to get it to move. I ended up putting a little bit of heat on this one because it rounded off and I just couldn't get it to turn. And then I hit it with the chisel a couple of times, hammer and a punch. So I'm going to have to replace that one with another bolt. It won't be the same bolt because I doubt our dealership in town here stocks those things. So just some things to keep in mind. Maybe grab yourself, if you're going to do this job, grab yourself a couple of those bolts. Buy that little crossover tube that goes in here. Goes from the oil cooler into the timing cover. And then that'll just help make this job go a lot more smoothly. So I'll see what I can get done today. Like I say, I'm going to be doing a lot of cleaning in here and get that gasket, what's left of it, peeled off there. Clean up that crossover tube thing, pull it out of there, clean it up real good. And I'm going to wash up the coolers because they're all full of mud. It's pretty tough with the way the grill's set up in this truck and the condenser core. It's tough to get in there and wash. So clean it off the best you can when it's in the truck, but you can see that it's plugged up pretty bad. So clean that and the fan and stuff, and I'll wash all that up and degrease it. And then I'm going to start putting it back together, so I'll keep you posted. Been scrubbing on this thing for a little bit here and got it all cleaned up. It's in really good shape. I think it is anyways. There's a little bit of pitting just around here, some minor pitting from the coolant. But other than that, it's in really good shape. And this little bit of pitting here, if it's a little bit deeper and you're concerned about it, just go ahead and put a little bit of anaerobic sealer on your O-ring seals. I'd probably want to put sealer on the outside of the seals so it matches this mating surface. Also, when you're looking at the channel that these seals sit in, anaerobic sealer, if you ever have to go back in, is going to be harder to get out of here, these channels. So I'd rather put it on the outside of the gasket if there's an area that I'm concerned with. I'm probably not going to use much of it, if any, on this side of the cover. When you're cleaning aluminum, of course, you want to be very gentle and you don't want to use like the brown Scotch-Brite pads on your cookie cutter and your die grinder. Just using a razor blade, brush, or a brass brush to get down in some of those channels and clean it out. Some of it came out just when I steam cleaned it. I took this out and steam cleaned it all off. And I was able to get the nozzle right into some of these channels, and that blew out the little bits of O-ring and gaskets. This is the back side of the cover. There's where the coolant leak was. Cleaned up really good. I'm using an SOS pad too, not an SOS pad, Scotch-Brite, that red Scotch-Brite that's sitting down there. So that works really good to get in there and scrub out all the coolant that was all crusty and stuck in there, and pieces of the old gasket, the old O-ring seal setup that this thing uses. I've got a new front structure gasket kit. I'll see what's all involved. It looks like everything's there, I hope. The only thing, here's where that oil cooler pipe goes in, and I cleaned that up really good. I actually had to use I did use a flapper wheel on that. I don't like to because you don't want to remove too much material, but that's something that I'm going to definitely be putting some anaerobic sealant on. I don't have time to wait for the O-rings, the new O-rings to come in for taking that fitting out of the oil cooler. I'm just going to leave that because it is so crusty, and it's going to be a job getting it out of there for one thing. And another thing is I don't think it's going to leak because it's just things like cemented in there. But I did clean it up, and I was going to show you the O-ring. I got it off now, but you couldn't even tell the O-ring was on there. It just looked like a straight piece of pipe, and it was so crusty I couldn't even hardly break it free with my O-ring pick. Got all that cleaned up. I got to clean the channel out, the O-ring channel out a little bit more. Put anaerobic sealant on that. Got the O-ring off, but at first it's so hard that it looks like it was actually a piece of the pipe. You couldn't even tell there was an O-ring, and there was so much corrosion holding it in there. So I was able to break it out, dig it out with my O-ring pick. So I'm going to have to go around and clean that channel up really good. Put in a new O-ring. I think these orange ones, one of these orange ones here is the replacement for it. I hope there's one in there. I think there's 3 in there. I know for sure that 2 of them are for the cover here. So I'm really hoping that I don't have to wait for those. But if I do, I mean, that's life. I don't want to go back in and fix those. Yeah, so there's 2 in the cover there, and then I think the other one's for that pipe over there. So what I found with just a couple things to keep in mind is that you have a plastic sensor here, so when you're flipping this over, make sure you don't break that off, or else you'll be ordering one of those. Okay, and then here's the other side that I already showed you. What I found is that Castrol Super Clean Undiluted works nice on aluminum. Spray it on there, and it takes the corrosion off, but it doesn't seem to pit the aluminum at all. It just cleans it really well. This is the time to clean your water spouts and stuff. That's really tough to get that one when it's in the truck. Lower rad hose connection. So that's where I'm at with this. Got the block all cleaned up and the old gasket off. There was just a little bit of pitting you can see around there. Not much. Some of that is because when I started here, there was a whole bunch of green antifreeze, like the old, I think it's propylene glycol, ethylene glycol maybe. And it was concentrate, and it was being mixed with straight water, tap water, not distilled water. So it was raw water and that old antifreeze, and it was just being added. It had never been changed before. So that can, of course, as you know, will pit especially as hard on aluminum and stuff. So it's all been changed out, and I use a 50-50 premix long life antifreeze. So that's what's going back in it, and it's going to be fresh stuff. It's been a few years since I changed it, so put some fresh antifreeze in. It's not worth trying to save it and filter it and stuff like that, especially if it's a few years old already and it's only good for 5 anyways. Alright, now I'm going to start putting my seals back in this. Okay, there's a few things that I want to make sure everybody knows here, and one is that I ordered this kit here. I have a good parts guy, by the way. It's not his fault. He's not really familiar with internationals and that, so he was able to get international parts, and the people at the international dealership said this is what I need. So this is a front cover gasket kit. This is supposed to be a kit, gasket kit, that'll cover, that's the part number for it, supposed to have all the seals that I would need to reseal the front timing structure. I told him I need everything that it's going to take to take that apart and put it back together and reseal it. And this is what they told him would work. So it has a lot of the seals, like I'm pretty sure these are oil pump seals. This is the water pump O-ring. It doesn't, however, it doesn't have the one that goes to the oil cooler, that crusty one there. It doesn't contain that one, so that's got to be ordered separate. Pretty sure one of these red ones goes on that valve. You got your gasket for your oil pickup. That's the lower rad hose spout, and it's got these goofy O-rings for your timing cover. So it does have that stuff in it. But what it's missing is the compressor O-ring that goes in there. It's missing the high pressure oil pump O-ring that goes in there, and this is all stuff that you have to take apart. When I ordered a gasket kit, I expect to get everything that I would need, and this one doesn't have it. It also doesn't have the crankcase front main seal that goes in the front of the oil pump housing there. It's right here. It doesn't have that seal. So it has the O-rings. I better make sure, but I'm pretty sure that it has the O-rings to seal the oil pump here. Right there. I'm pretty sure that's what those big quad rings are for. So why would they put that in there when they know you have to take that apart and not put the front crankshaft seal in? So that's pretty stupid, and it was my mistake to not check that parts box to make sure that it had those seals in there. Anyway, it's just about ready to go back together, but now I've got a few days of waiting for parts, so it's not gonna. I was hoping to put that cover back on today, but I'm not going to risk it because one of those orange O-rings over there is not the right O-ring for this little problem child here. So I've got those coming. So that's frustrating, but that's just something that you need to know. I'm just in touch with the parts people right now, ordering stuff. Guys, they're sending me pictures and whatnot, and I'm telling them what I need. So there's the high pressure oil pump. That seal wasn't included. But what this is giving me some time to do is get this radiator set up. So I just was going to show you how crusty the old rad was. So this one was leaking coolant from the timing cover, leaking coolant. I've replaced the rad hoses because they were old and I kept tightening them up and they just didn't want to seal. And look at how crusty this rad is. So I'm thinking that the leak was coming from that area, right in there. That's the most damp. So this, it might be coming from somewhere. Yeah, look at that. I just broke right through right there. So just crusty. Look at all that rust. So I'm just taking the fittings out. This one had an auto magic transmission, so I'm taking those GIC fittings out and putting them into the new radiator. Got that one in there. And I'm gonna, I don't know, maybe I'll see if I can get some new rad hoses for it. They aren't very old, but it might be worth just replacing them right now. If replacing the radiator, I always would put new rad hoses in, but these ones I just replaced not too long ago because they were leaking. So this thing was leaking coolant from a few different areas. It's going to be nice to get it all sealed up again so it doesn't leave a puddle. So I'm just going to clean up and put some floor dry down and make sure I got all my bolts and stuff here. I ordered a couple more. I told them to order a couple more of these bolts with these little soft ones that like to round off, that hold the timing cover back into the engine block there. So there's a few of them. See those little holes there? Cam cover plate there has a couple of them and stuff. So fun stuff. So it's coming though, piece by piece. It'll probably be next week now before I actually get the thing back in service, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way it goes. I don't have to tell you guys what it's like getting parts right now with the whole situation with supply chain disruptions and all that good stuff. So anyways, that's where I'm at, and I'll carry on. Okay, just put the rear timing cover in. I just put a little bit of anaerobic sealant down on that crossover pipe, cleaned it up real good, new O-ring. So that's in now. Just had to grease in a couple O-rings, like the compressor seal O-ring, and just a little bit on this top seal here. I greased that in a little bit. That's where our leak was coming from up there. So everything's ready to go back in. I put a little bit of sealant on the oil pan gasket down there. I didn't end up with any leaks there. So I'm going to start putting the bolts in now. Okay, a couple things to remember is make sure that you got your gasket in down there. So there's a little gasket in behind there that's an oil passage. You want to make sure, so it's very important that you got that glued in before you put the timing cover back on. And the compressor has a bracket at the back that holds it up, and so it'll kind of hang in there. This one's got the hydraulic, the steering pumps on the back of that too, you'll see. But the front of the compressor can drop down, and so can your high pressure oil pump. The high pressure oil pump's easy to put back in there. You can just get in here and lift it with your hand. The compressor, I actually had to put a jack underneath there with some 4x4s. See, it's still there. There's a block of wood there. So I just put a bottle jack underneath there and jacked it up, and then I actually had to pry it over to get it to, and then still tap on this a little bit with my dead blow hammer to get it in there. So a good idea is to grease all your O-rings in, or use anaerobic sealant, whatever you like, because they want to pop out if you got a tap on this. I had to take the timing cover back off and grease them in, make sure they didn't pop out. Also your reservoir for your high pressure oil pump, you want to make sure that you grease that O-ring that seals that passage in, so that you don't end up with problems later. If the O-ring pops out, you don't have a seal, that's going to cause some hard start issues and stuff. But anyway, it's in there now, so I can go ahead. So start putting the bolts. Put all the small bolts back in again. Snugged up. Remember, this one here is going through the coolant timing gears passage. So that's, it's easy to overlook because it's kind of recessed in there. But anyways, if you put these bolts aside, you'll know which ones go in there. So you got your cam retaining plate there, and then you'll be able to see where all these really soft ones that are hard to get out go, because they're in the shallow holes, of course. Those are 19 foot-pounds. I found a torque spec online for those. And you'll want to go, of course, pattern, crisscross your pattern, torque them down, and then go through them one more time, because what you'll probably find is as the O-rings crush, that you get a little bit more of a turn out of them. There we go. Nice crush. Grab me torque. Yeah, so I'm just working my way through those. Gonna get them all torqued down, and then I'm gonna start getting these timing, or the gears in, and I'll show you the timing procedure when I do that. Okay, the gears are in place, all timed and torqued down. So I'll just go through a little bit about the timing procedure. So Wes did a nice job of explaining it too. But this one, I'll just give you a close-up. There is the dimple mark on the crankshaft, but a single circle with an X in it on the idler gear here, the lower idler gear. And then up here, there's two circles with two X marks. And the white paint was on there already. I don't know if somebody's been in here or if it's straight from factory. And they've got this one marked as well. So there's one X on there, and then a dimple mark on the camshaft gear. So that's what you want to have lined up. I had it on top dead center when I took it apart, but I had to move the crankshaft just slightly to get the puller into the cam gear, because there was a bolt back there that when it was on top dead center I couldn't get the puller in. I could feel it right there. So that's how I ended up putting all that back together. Give you a good idea of how to time it, and you get all those marks lined up and everything, so good. Oh yeah, so then here's your special socket, goes on this bottom idler pulley bolt, and that is torqued to 470 foot-pounds. This top one's torqued to 240 foot-pounds, so it's a lot less than the top one. And I'll show you the special socket. So I ended up getting a socket from Snap-on Tools, and it could be used, but you have to have somebody turn it down on a lathe because you can see the wall's too thick on it. This is the one special OTC socket that International recommends. You can see the wall thickness is just a lot less. And this is, I actually was able to get it off with this 13/16 here. But of course it's nicer to have the actual socket, and this fits in there nicely, so it's, when you put all that torque on it, it's not going to want to turn because your wall, like, there's not a lot of clearance in there. It kind of holds it in place. So like I say, you could just have somebody cut this one down. That's what I was going to do, but I realized that they sent me 2 sockets. They sent me the proper one here. I'm not too sure what happened there. But anyways, that's your 20mm 12-point socket. That's that one. It's the official international special tool for it. So I'm going through. Oh yeah, another thing is, remember your high pressure oil pump bolts. The long one goes in the bottom, the shorter one goes on the top. It's actually not as bad as it seems putting those in there. They line up pretty good. So I've got everything bolted up now. I've got to check my run out on the cam gear and put the cover on that next, and then I'm just waiting for a couple more torque specs here, and I'll be putting the front cover on. I skipped ahead a little bit. I should have maybe taken a video in between. I didn't think of it. I got the cover back on, bolts are all in. So remember a couple things. This bolt goes right through. There it goes through and holds on your alternator bracket. And also this bolt has a 10mm head here on your water pump. It also goes right through and has a nut on the other side. So maybe if you, like, I accidentally put that with the oil pump and couldn't figure out which hole it's supposed to go and belong to. So anyways, just keep some things to keep track of, because it can excuse me, it can you know, cause you a bit of anxiety wondering where it went. So the main seal in, the oil pump, get the oil pump back on there. So it's coming along good. I have this thing back together today. I can't remember, there is a manual online to tells you your torque specs for these. I think they're like 13 on these timing cover bolts. I had to turn the cam position sensor to get that bolt out of that cover. So still got it unplugged there. So now I'm gonna carry on. We're gonna get the harmonic balancer back on, the rest of the stuff on the front of the engine, the alternator and that, and then I'm gonna wash out the rad support, clean it up in here, put that brand new radiator in, get the intercooler in and stuff, and hopefully have her just about ready to crank this afternoon. Okay, so made some progress here. Just about done. Just about ready to put that rad in and the air-to-air stuff. Got the harmonic balancer, got the new tensioner in, got the belts put on and stuff like that. So you can crank it over with the cam sensor unplugged so it doesn't try to fire the injectors. If you're trying to prime the oil system, that's one way of doing it. When you have the rail off and it's drained and stuff, that's how you can prime the rail. Just avoid scuffing the injectors. I'm not going to fix the fan clutch. I got the rebuild kit and I would love to do it, but it's just this truck needs to get back in service and it's working the way it is, so I'm just going to leave it unplugged for the moment. Pop a new thermostat in it before I put the rad in, and then the rest is pretty straightforward after that. Just get the coolers in there, fill it up with the antifreeze, and then like putting the reservoir and the pipes and all that stuff back in is pretty straightforward. Doesn't take a terribly long amount of time. I don't see the new tensioner for the air conditioner, so I might have to pop a new bearing in the idler on that one. It's not in really bad shape. Let's have a look at this side. Back together now. So hopefully it fires right back up and doesn't leak antifreeze this time. Just cleaned it up in there. See, there's a pad underneath the radiator there, so it's good to get all your grit, salt and stuff washed out of there before putting the new one back in. Well, it's all back together now. Filled up the coolant. I'm sure it's going to burp. Got that new radiator in there and the block's full and stuff, so I'm sure it's going to, once that thermostat opens up, it'll burp a little bit, so I got lots in there because of that. You probably noticed that the reservoir's right up to the full line, so that's the only reason why I'm explaining that. I know it's kind of filled. So it's all together. What I didn't bother cranking it over with the cam sensor disconnected like when you do an oil change, or if you have the rail empty on these trucks. That's what you're supposed to do, so it doesn't fire the injectors, but it still builds oil pressure. So you just crank it over a bit to pump everything up. I didn't do that because I just took the oil temperature sensor out, the timing cover here, and filled that reservoir for the high pressure oil pump that's back there, and then I cranked it and it fired right up. I cranked it before I had the radiator in and stuff, so it fired up really good, so I knew it was going to be good. So a couple, it's like anything, it's not a bad job doing this, it's just, it takes time, and when you're working with inside of an engine and those parts, that you're going to find that other things that need to be replaced, like the tensioner pulleys and stuff on this one, that fan isn't working. I've got the rebuild kit, but I'll have to do it at another time. So it's going to take some time. You're always going to find a few things that need to be fixed on the way in and out. It's kind of funny how this truck, it's just this model. I worked on another one, I changed the radiator in it, the sister truck to this one, and it had a different air-to-air intercooler. This one, the way it curls over top of the radiator, you've got to put it in on the right procedure for that. So you got to put the rad in, put the shroud in with the radiator, which you might have noticed that I didn't do, so I had to change that, do it differently. Then you got to remember that these long bolts go through they hold the condenser core. No, they don't. Condenser core bolts to the air-to-air. These hold this front frame thing that the condenser core bolts into to the rad support frame. So you just got to put it all together in the right proper order, or else you're going to end up taking stuff back out, spending time doing that. That's just on this model of truck, though. Other ones, of course, are going to be a little different. So that's what I found. Like anything, I learned some things. If those guys would shut up, I can talk. All right, so I'll show you this thing running. So it runs really good, just like before I brought it in. Found a couple things with the coolant leaks on this truck. Like I said, it was leaking coolant from a few different areas, and I had replaced the radiator hoses, upper and lower hoses, and not too long ago, and it still was leaking. Like I say, the radiator also was leaking, and so was the timing cover, but the puddle on the floor just kept getting bigger and bigger. So hopefully that's all done now. But what I found when I took the thermostat housing out is it was corroded really badly, especially right where the clamp goes and the hose clamps on. So I think that was a contributing factor. There's also a lot of corrosion down on the bottom rad hose. So that's the way that spout on the bottom of the radiator curls up like that is what causes a little bit of grief getting it in. That's just why you have to make sure you put your shroud in after you get your radiator in. And yeah, that aluminum spout on the timing cover down there for your lower rad hose was all corroded up, so I had that all cleaned up. And then I didn't replace the rad hoses at this time because they're not very old, and I didn't want to wait for more parts to show up. I think everybody knows that right now it's iffy. You never know. Sometimes there's a part on the shelf, sometimes it's a long ways away. So the other thing with this was the fan belt, and that was starting to shred, and I'm pretty sure that was because of this pulley part of the tensioner. So I replaced that, and I think it should be good now. So there you have it. Hope you learned, and I hope it helped someone with this.